I'm going to try and move as fast as I can. Thankfully, we covered some material in the adult lesson this morning. It just turned out very convenient that it happened to line up at the same time. We didn't plan that. It just happened. Yippee. Before we even look at any of this, I want to remind you of the fact that when God spoke to David through Nathan the prophet about what would come on Israel in the future, he said to them, if your sons aren't obedient, I'm going to bring on them the scourge of other nations. Okay? And what we see throughout the prophets of the Old Testament is a consistent message that the way God works when he's angry is some army comes over the hill or around the corner. And that's the way he punishes. He also throws in some plagues, some famine, things like that. Okay, just keep that in mind as we're looking at this. And I know that the final vision of Daniel didn't happen in the lion's den, but the reason why I picked this picture is you have to think about how precious Daniel had to be to God. And how many times in the book of Daniel, while the people of Judah were in captivity, that God actually spared and shortened the days. Remember we talked about that in the adult lesson? Shortened the persecution so that they could survive. Not only think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, think about Daniel himself, think about the story of Esther and what God did so that the people of his promise, and that would extend to the church as well, are never fully taken out of the picture. Let's see if this thing works here. I'm going to talk about the final vision of Daniel today, and I'll tell you right up front, it's 3 chapters long, and it covers 3 empires. So we are not going to cover it in any kind of exhaustive way today. I really want to focus on some things at the very end of it, but in order to do that, you kind of have to be up to speed with the rest of it. So we start off in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. The Persian Empire, or the Persian kingdom, was going on for many years before they became the controller or dominator of the Jewish people. So when we talk about the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, the Greek, and the Roman empires in prophecy of the Bible, we start dealing with them at the year that they take control of God's people. But these kingdoms are going on a long time before that. So if you're reading in a history book, you have to know that, because they're talking about the kingdom many years before they become a dominator of the people of Judah. But this begins in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, early in what we would consider the Medo-Persian Empire and how it related to Israel. A revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belshazzar. Its message was true. It concerned a great war. Okay. Now, I already told you, this prophecy covers 3 empires. And it starts 550 years before Jesus' ministry, and it lasts to eternity. The vision does. Just keep that in mind. But it says it's concerned a great war. So we have to be looking at what's going to happen to the people of Daniel and what this is really aiming at in this prophecy. It says, the understanding of the message came to him in a vision. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. We talked about that in a lesson this morning too, right? That it could be bad news that you hear. He says, he mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips. I used no lotions at all until 3 weeks were over. Verse 4, on the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the river the Tigris River. I'm pointing that out because that's going to play a role later on as we're talking about this. I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen. So in the first couple chapters of this prophecy, this is all that he has. This man dressed in linen, okay? With a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. And all I'm going to say about that at this point is this sounds very similar to what we read in Revelation in the opening chapters. It sounds very similar to what in other visions people see as immortal beings, glorified, shining, immortal beings. A little more on that later. Verse 20. So he said, do you know why I have come to you? Yes, I know. There's a lot of verses between verse 4 and 20. I told you we're going to move quick through the first part. So he said, do you know why I have come to you? So this is the man that's described above, talking to Daniel in the vision. He says, soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. We talked about that a little earlier today, about this Archangel Michael that stands up for the people of Daniel. We read about this in the book of Revelation as well. So it's probably something of note. Verse 36, yeah, jumping down through. Most of that in between is talking about Daniel's reaction to what he's seeing and the fear of the people that are with him that realize something big is happening. And chapter 10 is really just positioning you before you hear the main body of the prophecy. Verse 36, the king will do as he pleases. He will exalt, I skipped here something. Yeah, that is 11:36. Something is out of order. That's all right. We can move on. The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god. And I told you this covers 3 empires. The trick in this prophecy is figuring out where the break point is. Okay? He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is complete. Why are these important? These are clues that tell you this is not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, because most of the world says it is. Most of the world beyond this says, well, really what this is prophesying is a coming future Antichrist. That's most of the Christian world. Most scholars will say that this talks about Antiochus Epiphanes, and that's how they know that Daniel had to be written after 164 BC. I suggest to you that this is now changed to Rome. And we can talk a little bit about how we know that. At the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, before he dies, he goes down into Egypt one last time. He has some success with Egypt at times, and sometimes he does not have success with Egypt. History has to show you this. I can't prove it from the Bible, but history will show you this. But what is clear in history, and this is very easy to find. In fact, we have a phrase that's said today that comes from this time. It's called draw a line in the sand. President Obama used that phrase not very many years ago. Draw a line in the sand. And it comes from a time in history where Antiochus Epiphanes went down into Egypt and Rome said, you're not going to touch them. You leave them alone. And an emissary of Rome got down and drew a circle around him and said, you cross that and you cross us. And Antiochus Epiphanes got the point and went home. On his way, he was mad, and he beat up on Jerusalem. And then he died. Now, there's more to that story, but that's what we see historically. So what we see in this is he will exalt and magnify himself above every god. And if you notice the asterisk, says, declared by the Roman Senate on January 1 of 42 BC, Divus Julius. And from that day on, their coinage had this, which means Julius is a god. Okay? Luke 21, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that the desolation is near. Now, I didn't know we were going to talk about that this morning. We already looked at this, right? For these are the days of vengeance. Remember, this is a time of a great war that Daniel is being told about. He says, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. Now, this is all from Luke. This is what Jesus is saying is going to happen to the people of Israel. Let's move on. Daniel 11, verse 40. And now I'm going to drop into this because I think it's important for us to note something here. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him. The first him there is the king of the north. The king of the north will storm out against him with chariots, cavalry, and great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. When you're reading in Daniel and it talks about the king of the north and the king of the south, that can get really confusing. People go, well, I thought that was this guy, and now you're saying it's this guy? Well, it uses the same phrase all the way through all the empires. And the easiest way to understand what the king of the north and the king of the south is imagine yourself standing in Jerusalem, and you go, what political powers with their armies are approaching us from the north? And what political powers and their armies would approach us from the south on any given day in history? And the ones from the south would be the king of the south, and the ones from the north would be the king of the north. And those individuals change. We had 4 Antiochuses covered in the 11th chapter. And we're talking from the time of Daniel way to the future. So how many generations, how many decades, how many centuries are we talking? Here's what I believe this event is. On September 2 of 31 BC, the Battle of Actium between Octavian, who would be the king of the north, and the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, king of the south. Later, Mark Antony and Cleopatra lose the war and commit their famous suicides, right? Movies, plays by Shakespeare. This is not something that's hard to find in history. Octavian is sole ruler of Rome, and in 27 BC, he is awarded the title August or Augustus, which means the revered, by the Roman Senate. This is viewed by historians as the end of the Roman Republic and the start of the Roman Empire. So from this point forward, this is what Israel has to deal with. This is the power that is in charge of them. Well, how? Well, famous King Herod, right? Everybody has probably heard of King Herod. He had to go to Rome, and he had to give the Caesar a bunch of money. And the Caesar said, okay, you can be a king over that region as long as you understand you are a vassal of me. I rule it. I'm allowing you to be basically a manager. Verse 41. He, and this would be the Roman emperor or the king of the north, will also invade the beautiful land. That's Israel. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. Why do I have that in red? Because this does not fit Antiochus Epiphanes. The things we're going to read here about him. He says he will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. Yes, they did. That cannot be Antiochus Epiphanes. The whole idea of the line in the sand proved that Rome was the big dog and told him to go home. He will gain control of the treasures of gold and silver and all the riches of Egypt, with the Libyans, the Cushites, in submission. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him. And all you have to do to see this is see what happened in the history of Rome up through 476 AD. The threats came from the northern Germanic tribes above them, and what really made them mad was the revolt in Jerusalem. Okay? And he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain. Some of your versions will say, between the sea and the holy mountain. Where did Titus set up his headquarters? In the Antonia fortress, right next to the temple buildings. Yet he will come to his end and no one will help him. This agrees with all the prophecies about Rome. The only difference is Daniel is specifically talking about what's going to happen to his people. So he just makes the statement that Rome's going to come to an end and there's nobody to help them. And that agrees completely with what we read in the book of Revelation. More on that another day. Daniel 12, verse 1, and I have verse 1a because we're going to talk about verse b separately. At that time, it's all the same vision. Daniel 10, 11, and 12, all the same vision. So when it starts out in verse 1 of chapter 12 and says, at that time, we have to back up to what we just read. At the time that the Roman, the king of the north, comes at them with great anger, ready to destroy and annihilate many, that's what we're talking about. Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. Now, is he going to stop it, or does he just shorten it? He says, there will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. And I quote Matthew 24, 15 and verse 22, which we looked at earlier this morning. It shouldn't say 15, it should say 21 and 22. That's the time period we're looking at here. Daniel 12, 1b through 4. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. So at the end of the time of trouble that's greater than any other time of trouble that ever has been or ever will be, at the end of that, Michael is standing up for them during this time, and the end result for the true believers is resurrection to everlasting life. But the rest are still resurrected to everlasting shame and contempt. So ask yourself this, how far into the future is Daniel's prophecy covering? This takes us clear through the 1,000-year reign of Christ, through the little season, to the great white throne judgment. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens. And we're going to see that phrase a little later, those who are wise. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens. Remember the guy that was real shiny that he saw? And I said, kind of sounds like immortal beings. Well, the immortal beings that are raised to immortality, to everlasting life, are going to shine, literally. like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. And what we see after the time of Christ is not only are the Jews sent all over the planet, but in our times, and in the times of our parents and grandparents, as modes of transportation increased, right? And people were able to travel the world to learn things. We can go back to 1492 and see that there was some travel that happened, right? That changed the way we look at the world today. This part that's on your screen is kind of an inset. He's going to go back now. Daniel wants he wants to find out more about, well, what is this all about? Yeah, he's been told that it's going to result in this thing called a resurrection, but he wants to know how we're getting there, what's going to happen to the people. It says, then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood two others, one on this bank of the river and one on the opposite bank of the river. So now there's three. You have the river Tigris, right? And the one who's standing over the top of it, who he saw before, the bright, shiny, powerful one. Now there's one on each side of the river, the Tigris River. When we look at the maps in a few minutes, I want you to remember this. The Tigris River, and see where the Tigris River is on the map and what's going on either side of it. It says, one of them said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? The man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand. He's standing over the water, and there's guys on both sides of the river, and he goes, duh, duh. And I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, times, and half a time. Now, I gave you the references to look at here. Put them in your notes if you want. I'm not going to talk about that today, but I'm just telling you the information is there in Daniel 7, Revelation 11, and Revelation 13, where that phrase is used. And from that, on another day, we can learn something about what's prophesied about how long the power of Rome would last. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed. So the people of Israel, the Jews at the time of Jesus, were entering into a time that would result in them being broken. Not gone, but broken before it's all done. Verse 8, I heard, but I did not understand. So I asked, my Lord, what will the outcome of all this be? He replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end. It says, I've given you all I'm going to give you, plus what I'm going to say here in a minute. That's enough. Go your way. That isn't really something that we would probably like to hear. This is the end of Daniel's life. Okay? Go your way, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand. So, we should expect to look into the world today and into Israel today, into the Jews today, and those people who claim the various religions that are not accurate with the scriptures and get it, that they're not going to get it. Okay? He says, but those who are wise will understand. So that gives us a glimmer of hope. That says if you're scripturally, spiritually wise, you can figure some of this out. And then there's no break. Just from there it says, from the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, 70 AD, there will be 1290 days. Throughout the prophecies of the Old Testament, it is quite consistent that if it says it's days, it stands for years. And if you try to make 1290 days work on this, you just come into nowhere. Nothing has changed, especially from 70 AD. As Mike pointed out this morning, it isn't until 135 AD that Rome quits just physically beating up on these people. 1290 days doesn't bring you to anything that I know of. Blessed is the one who waits. Blessed is the one. So he's saying, you need to pay attention. 1290 days or 1290 years after this 70 AD event, something's going to change. And blessed is the person who's the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1335 days or years. Then he says something that's really precious to Daniel. Drink this in. As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. How would you like God to tell you in a vision at the end of your life, go to sleep, when you wake up, you're going to get your inheritance? That's pretty good to be told you'll be there. You're going to get it. Okay, now let's deal with some numbers. Starting from 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by Rome. If we add 1290 years to 70 years, we come up to 1360 AD. Okay? If we add 70 and 1335, we come up with 1405 AD. And it said that it implied something was going to change at 1360, but blessed would be the one that could survive and make it to 1405. By the way, I hear people talk about Jewish calendars. If you look at the Jewish calendar and you do the math from 70 AD, you come up to exactly the same number of years that we have from 70 AD. The Jewish calendar is kind of funky. You have to look at it careful. When you say a Jewish year, yeah, their year looks like it's shorter, but it's not, because every few years they have a makeup month that brings it right around to 365, and they understand the quarter thing. They understand it, and they made up for it. So either way you do the math, in Jewish or Gregorian, you come up to the same numbers. So what changes do we see in this era in history from 1360 AD to 1405? What changes? So what happens across the empires? Expulsions of Jews, way more than I can list today. The major ones are starting in 1290, not that far before 1360, right? They're booted out of England. 1360, they're booted out of Hungary. 1421 out of Austria. 1492 out of Spain and Sicily. And those two were 237,000 Jews that were told, you leave, because the only thing you have left here is the Inquisition. 1496, Portugal. Why 1492 in Spain and 1496 Portugal? Well, because Ferdinand and Isabella, who are running Spain, have a daughter. She marries the king of Portugal. And part of the agreement in the dowry is that you boot the Jews out, because we want this whole region to be holy Catholic. part of the marriage agreement. Okay? Another big one, the Little Ice Age started in 1303, lasted till 1850. And this is accepted by science. You can just put in LIA in Google and it'll pop up. I mean, this is not hard information to find, which is part of a theory of mine that the things we see in prophecy, we should be able to find as acceptable things among historians. It should be that easy to find if we do the digging. What happened as a result of that Little Ice Age? Decreased livestock survival and crop production, and it increased disease and famine. A big one, Black Death. Notice the years. We're looking for what happens between 1360 and 1405, right? And what changes came about. Right before this, they are just crawling out of the Black Death in 1360. 1346, 1353, one of the biggest pandemics ever to be on planet Earth, according to the historians, still. And what did it do? As many as 50 million dead, estimates as high by some as 50% of Europe's population. And the general church, that's a nice way to say the church that was really ruling the world at that time, is in a scramble to replace clergy and ecclesiastical orders. I found a lot of evidence that says they were hit the hardest. And so all the guys that were the Latin scholars are dying off, and they're replacing them with younger people that don't know Latin. And all of a sudden the Mass starts being done in the common vernacular. And the writings are in the common vernacular. And so there's a transparency, because people go, when the guy stands over, you know, I can be in my house playing dominoes. And they go, oh, he said it in my language now. And they go, is that really what they've been saying all this time? And we're just coming into the Italian Renaissance, right? We are not very far from the printing press. All of this is leading up to the Reformation and a time of for the true believers as the world opens up, right? Another thing happens in 1360. Following the death of Bey Orhan, that was the leader of the Ottoman Empire, or the Turk Empire, Murad, his son, succeeds as the new Bey of the Ottoman Empire. 1361, he conquers Edirne, which is soon turned into the effective capital of the empire, and more importantly, the staging point for the Ottoman expansion into Europe. Not far before this, they'd conquered the city of Bursa. Bursa is directly south, just across the waterway there, from Istanbul, what was then Constantinople. This other town, Edirne, is west, the direction of Europe from Constantinople. So now the Ottomans have completely surrounded Constantinople, which was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Okay. Now a little map time. The Roman Empire in 117 AD. Look how vast it is. Look what it covers. Keep that in your mind as we go through the next maps. Eastern Rome. The red line around it is at the time of Justinian in 527, it says here. That's what he controlled. Within 500 years, it's down to the pink zone. Within another 300 years, it's down to just the red spots. What's happening to Eastern Rome? And ask yourself, why? This is a map of the year 1400 of the Papal States and what is called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, I know that this is in German, but if you look at the top, maybe you can recognize it. You know what a Reich is? The Third Reich and the First Reich, right? That's realm or kingdom, and it's the Holy Romiske. I don't know how you say that. Romisk, Reich, the Holy Roman Empire. And basically, it's all that area just from Italy up to the North Sea. That's where it's been reduced to. Now, there are Catholic kings in France, Britain, Spain, Portugal, but the lands that are considered the Holy Roman Empire has been shrunk down this far by 1400. But there's another thing in play here. All three of these have something in common. They're all Muslims. Three great empires at this time. So you have the Ottoman, the Timurid, and the Mamluk Sultanate. And this is in 1405. Why does Tony have 1405? I didn't make this map. I didn't put the number on here. My point is, this is a number that has some importance in history. I didn't just pick this up. You can find this on the internet. But what happened in 1405? Well, first we have to talk about what's happening in 1404. Obviously, the Muslims are on the move and growing in power, and they're putting vast pressure on the Holy Roman Empire and what used to be called Eastern Rome. Some people call it Byzantine. To the fact where the Byzantine Empire hardly looks like it's anything, or East Rome. It's just about completely annihilated. But these three Muslim groups are pushing on each other. And this big one, this Timurid Empire, is really a Mongol, combination Mongol, Muslim group. And the leader of this is a guy named Timur, and he, or you might know him historically as Tamerlane, or Timurlane, or Timur the Lame. That's where how words changed as they go across different languages. You notice right through the center, right down below the Caspian Sea, that's what's known as the Silk Road. And he controlled it. And he had it and maintained it open to all the Christian customers that he had in Europe, right? Of these three, even though they're Muslim, there was a vast difference between two of them, the Mamluks and the Timurid Empire and the Ottomans. The difference is the way they treated the Jews. And so we have to look at that. So what happened in 1405? Timurid dies in 1405. And within just a few number of years, that empire completely disappears. What's left of it goes back over to the steppes of Asia. They withdraw. And his sons and grandsons, interfighting, it just falls apart. And so we have one big player that comes up, the Ottoman Empire. Now, if you look in the middle of this, there's a real dark spot right in the middle. That's where they were in 1307. And as we go through time up to the 1600s, it just goes further and further, and the lighter the color is, the more vast their empire. Notice they've completely taken over the Mamluks. They have completely taken over what was Eastern Rome, because in 1453, the Ottomans take Constantinople, the capital city of Eastern Rome, and it's gone. It's not there anymore. And this is vitally important to remember the role that Islam plays, especially if you're looking at chapter 9 in Revelation and the sixth trumpet. I'm not going to talk about that now. One more map before we read a few things here, before we close. I'm sorry, I'm going to take you a few minutes over. This is the expulsions of the Jews of Europe. I didn't make this map. It's out there available. Notice where the arrows point. And they're all pointing to areas that the Ottoman Empire controlled. Northern Africa, the Middle East, what's today Turkey, and that area, see that little seal up there where it says the Pale? That I did draw. The purple lines, dotted lines that goes up, that's an area called the Pale. We're not going to talk much about it right now because of time, but if you look historically what happens in the Pale, it's not good. And it's the area where we see Auschwitz and the result of that in the 40s of the last century, what happened there. But the Jews were pushed there because of all the expulsions and because of the way that the Ottomans treated it. Now, let's look at some things. Encyclopedia Britannica. I'm just showing this because this is not hard to find. The Ottomans first met the Jews as a settled community in 1326 when Orhan Gazi conquered Bursa. The Jews of Bursa received the Ottomans as saviors. The Etz Harim, or Hayim, Tree of Life synagogue that was built during Orhan Gazi's time and with his permission remained open until the 1940s. After Sultan Murad I conquered Edirne, many of the Jews who lived in the Balkans immigrated, which the Balkans were controlled by the Ottomans later on, immigrated to the Ottoman lands in hopes of better life. Many Jews fled the atrocities that they had faced in Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries and immigrated to Ottoman lands. The chief rabbi of Edirne, Isaac Zarfati, is known to have sent a letter to his co-religionists in Europe, inviting them to come to Turkey where every man may dwell at peace under his own vine and fig tree. Many Central European Jews took this letter seriously and settled in the Ottoman Empire. And what's following on these screens, some of it is from Encyclopedia Britannica, some of it I picked up off of Wikipedia just because it was more convenient, but there's many, many sources of this information. The Jews of Istanbul after the conquest. Ottoman Sultan Mohammed II, he's the guy that took Constantinople in 1453 on May 29th. Well, on June 1st, 3 days later, this is what he says. God has granted me many countries and ordered me to protect the progeny of his servants, Abraham and Jacob, to give them food and to take them under my protection, who would like to come and settle in Istanbul, in the capital city, to live in peace under the shadow of their own vineyard and fig tree, to trade freely and to own properties. And it was some Hebrew writer of the 16th century that showed this document. In July of 1492, remember that year? Somebody sailed the ocean blue. The new state of Spain expelled its Jewish and Muslim populations as part of the Spanish Inquisition. Bayezid II, the son of Mohammed II that took Constantinople, sent out the Ottoman navy under the command of Kamal Raiz to the Spanish port of Cadiz in order to evacuate them safely to Ottoman lands. So he sent his ships to pick them up. He didn't just open the door. Of course, there were Muslims included. That might have had something to do with it, right? He sent out proclamations throughout the empire that the refugees were to be welcomed. He granted the refugees the permission to settle in Ottoman Empire and become Ottoman citizens. He ridiculed Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile for expelling a class of people so useful to their subjects. You venture to call Ferdinand a wise ruler, he said to his courtiers. He who has impoverished his own country and enriched mine. Oh, by the way, I found good evidence that Mohammed II, that overtook Constantinople, his personal physician was a Jew. his court full of advisors. He saw the potential in them. Islam considered them the people of the book. Google it. See what it says about the people of the book. It isn't until later times that the issue between the Arabs and the Jews arise. It isn't until really the late 19th or 20th century that they become a conflict. At this point, they were the protectors. It says, Bayezid addressed a decree to all the governors of his European provinces, ordering them not only to refrain from repelling the Spanish refugees, but to give them a friendly and welcome reception. He threatened with death all those who treated the Jews harshly or refused them admission into the empire. Daniel received his vision 500 years before the time of Christ. The later part of the vision didn't come about for over 1900 years. That's going to 1360. Okay? Even if the book of Daniel wasn't compiled until after the death of Antiochus Epiphanes, as some would have us believe, large portions of Daniel's prophecies pertain to things far into his future and our future as well, to eternity. And I think we have to see God's hand at work. Let's close with a song. Thanks for your patience, by the way.
Close with number 279. Jesus is coming. Number 279. Stand as we sing.
Our loving Heavenly Father, we are truly thankful for your words of hope and promise, the prophecies that we see in them, that if we put our minds to it, we can understand the things that are happening through the ages and builds our faith to those things which you have said will happen in our future. We pray that you will bless the reading of your word today, that you will be with us as we travel to our homes, give us safe passage. And we do pray that you would send your Son soon, and that we might be granted a place in your kingdom on that day. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.